Welcome to Chapter 8 of our Civil War unit, The Crisis Deepens. The Caning of Sumner. Throughout the 1850s, tensions rose between Northerners and Southerners, not only in Kansas, but also in Congress. In 1856, Representative Charles Sumner of Massachusetts gave a speech denouncing the Kansas-Nebraska Act and slavery in general. 2 days later, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina attacked Sumner in retaliation. Brooks lunged at Sumner, beating him with his cane almost to the verge of death. This led to a divided response from the public, with Northerners calling Brooks a barbarian for his act, while Southerners celebrated him as a gentleman and defender of their rights. Dred Scott versus Sanford. Tensions worsened with the Supreme Court decision Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri, but his master took him to both Illinois and Wisconsin before returning to Missouri and ultimately dying. Scott sued for his freedom, arguing that his trips to Illinois and Wisconsin made him a free man automatically. The case reached the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Taney decided in favor of Sanford, saying that Scott's return to Missouri made him a slave. The court went on to say that slaves in general were property, and the U.S. government could not take away property, making slavery constitutionally supported. Stephen A. Douglas. He lived from 1813 until 1861. He was nicknamed the Little Giant because he was short but had a strong personality. He was born and raised in Vermont but spent a majority of his life in Illinois. He first worked as a state attorney and was later elected to the Illinois House of Representatives and as Illinois Secretary of State. In 1842, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1846, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. He was the primary author and supporter of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. He believed in something called popular sovereignty, the idea that each state should be able to vote on whether it could include slavery or not. Abraham Lincoln. He lived from 1809 until 1865. He was born in Kentucky, raised in Indiana, then lived in Illinois. He worked first as an attorney, then later served as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, and finally was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, very similarly to Stephen A. Douglas. In 1858, he ran against Douglas for one of Illinois' Senate spots. Upon accepting his nomination from the Republican Party, Douglas was the Democrat, Lincoln gave his famous House Divided speech. Turn to your House Divided speech in your packet and read it real quick. The Lincoln-Douglas debates. In 1858, Democrat Stephen A. Douglas and Republican Abraham Lincoln decided to set up a series of debates in order to support their campaigns. 7 cities were selected throughout Illinois for 7 different debates. Lincoln's main arguments were in favor of the abolition of slavery in the territories. Lincoln believed that when the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, it also included black men and women. Douglas disagreed, saying that the states had the right to decide, and the right to vote was a more essential right. The outcome of the debates. Each of the 7 debates was extremely popular, with large crowds showing up at each of them. In the end, Douglas won the election and continued his career in the Senate representing Illinois. Douglas's seat as senator was his last time in office before his untimely death. While Lincoln lost, he gained more popularity in Illinois and throughout the West. He became a more important member of the Republican Party, eventually earning the Republican presidential nomination for the 1860 election. John Brown. He lived from 1800 until 1859. He was born in Connecticut and raised in Ohio. In 1837, he became an abolitionist, declaring, "Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." During his lifetime, he met both Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. He commanded forces during the Bleeding Kansas conflict, leading Northern troops in the Battle of Blackjack, the Battle of Osawatomie, and in Pottawatomie. In the late 1850s, he began organizing forces for armed abolitionism. The Raid on Harper's Ferry. On October 16, 1859, John Brown and 19 men crossed the Potomac River into Harper's Ferry, Virginia. In Harper's Ferry, the U.S. government had built an arsenal of weapons. Brown hoped to seize the arsenal and arm the slaves, helping them to rebel against their masters and gain their freedom. The attack was initially successful, and Brown took the arsenal, killing the mayor during the attack. Unfortunately, this did not last long because Brown's men did not have enough supplies. The following day, Brown and his men were cornered by the U.S. Army, led by Robert E. Lee. Make sure to remember that name for later in this unit. Turn to the John Brown document in your packet and go ahead and read that. The election of 1860. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was chosen as a Republican candidate for president. Although not the favorite, Lincoln was ultimately selected from a group that included other important politicians, including Salmon P. Chase and William H. Seward. 3 other men were nominated in the election: John C. Breckinridge for the Southern Democrats, John Bell for the Constitutional Union Party, and Stephen A. Douglas for the Democrats. While the Republicans promised not to interfere with slavery in the South, when Lincoln won, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas left the Union. Summary. Tensions between the North and South continued to rise with the caning of Sumner and the raid on Harper's Ferry. It all came to a head when Abraham Lincoln was elected president and several Southern states seceded. Make sure you have all your terms and the summary written down in your packet.